to be getting joined later by some of the other members of the board. We're going to get underway. Welcome to the May, thank you, 24th Village Board work session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do we have any announcements for this evening?
Sure.
Please, go right ahead.
I'd like to call everybody's attention to a special event happening on June 9th and 10th at the Elks Lodge here in Ossining. It's the first annual Ossining Jazz Festival. It's a tribute to Sonny Chirac entitled Seize the Rainbow. There'll be 4 jazz bands in 2 nights. The shows begin at 7:30 and 9. You can go online and buy tickets through, I guess, paper tickets. So I want to remind everybody about that. And there's information on our website if you want to get to the link to buy the tickets, because we are looking to sell tickets in advance. Many of the musicians are local to Ossining, some born and raised here. So it's going to be a really great event. So that's June 9th and 10th. That's a Friday and a Saturday night. 4 bands in 2 nights, shows at 7:30 and at 9 o'clock. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Danny? Lynn just arrived at the table. Should I let folks know about it, or are you going to talk about it later? Okay, so then I will share it with folks. Okay, so you have had, we've had a presentation right here in this room from Kevin Dworka when he was doing his preliminary update of the housing study that he's performing for the village to look at our needs and our capacity. A number of folks participated in the community conversations that we've had, a couple earlier in the spring and then one more recently at the community center, where it was a little bit of a different format. And he and his team have been doing a lot of research and putting together a lot of numbers and looking at our zoning code. And we are welcoming the community back to a presentation. And it's going to be happening at the community center on June 8th. There will be actually 2 presentations, one of them again at lunchtime, so from 12 to 1:30 at the Joseph G. Caputo Community Center, and then one also that same day, June 8th, in the evening at the Community Center from 7 until 8:30 p.m. And so please go ahead and mark your calendar for June 8th. I don't know what day of the week that is, but June 8th, either join us for the lunchtime presentation or the evening presentation. And then I believe that's a Thursday, June 8th, right? And then the following Wednesday, Kevin will be coming back and giving a presentation to those of us on the board. So we're really looking forward to that. Trustee Bazemore, do you have any announcements before we get the agenda underway?
No, I do not.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the lead for staff this evening. Corporation Counsel Stuart Cotton.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Our first topic tonight is the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee's second report to the Board of Trustees. I believe Co-Chair Jeff Gasparo is here to make the report to the board.
Welcome, Jeff.
Good evening.
For folks who haven't seen you before, you and your co-chair did both present just a couple of weeks ago, and this is the second of 4 presentations that we have scheduled for the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee. So just so the public can stay up to date on what this committee is doing.
Right, and just to also update you on the progress of how often we've met, this is my second time in front of you. We've actually met every week that we could, and we've met 3 times. And since the last time we were here to update you, we've met once. But our next meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. But I just wanted to let you know sort of what's happened since we last updated you, and then sort of what we have next on the agenda. And then if you have any questions, be happy to answer that. So since we were last here, we adopted a mission statement. And I had shared a draft of that with you before, and what we adopted was similar to that. We did make some changes. We had a presentation from Dana White on current development in downtown, and she did a tremendous job. It was an exhaustive study of projects that have either been completed recently in downtown, are sort of in some sort of ongoing process, or projects that are yet to even take the first steps, but have had some sort of preliminary, taken maybe preliminary steps towards development. So that was at our last meeting since I was last year, and we also started just a discussion about how we would organize ourselves to actually do the research that that would enable us to make recommendations back to the Board of Trustees, which I think is what the Board of Trustees is looking for, some research and recommendations. So our plan is to form subcommittees that would do more in-depth research and then sort of report back to our group, and then sort of as a group make decisions on what of that research would maybe become a recommendation, would maybe become part of an actual physical report that we'll give to you at the end of this process. So we started the subcommittee discussion. We actually formed a couple of subcommittees. One is looking at outside groups that other municipalities have used, sort of in planning and consensus building, and even at some of the legal steps that municipalities would take when they get to the to more concrete steps towards development. So one subcommittee is going to be looking at those groups and doing sort of a comparative analysis of those groups. I'm actually on that subcommittee. We met last night. And we're going to try and be able to give at the end of this process maybe a range of options and some more in-depth discussion as to what those groups actually do to inform the Board of Trustees. Another subcommittee is preparing to do with our group a SWOT analysis, if you're familiar: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And that group has done a lot of work to prepare us. And our plan is next week, or not tomorrow, but the meeting that follows, we're going to do that. And we think that doing that type of assessment will sort of build a foundation for being able to make recommendations ultimately. So sort of an assessment of what's the current situation, and is there sort of common themes. Tomorrow's meeting, where actually Dana White, who's been an incredible asset to our group, is leading a tour for our members of the downtown. I don't know exactly what she has in store for that, but everyone is excited about that, and we've been talking about it on email and things like Facebook and things like that. And I think Justine, my co-chair, and I recently sort of proposed a framework for, and just a caveat that this hasn't actually been adopted by our group as a framework, but we've heard some feedback already of how we can sort of organize our research for the rest of the 90 days, because we want to be able to present something concrete back to the board at the end of this. So that's sort of my update as to where we're at. I don't know if there's any questions.
Did you want to chime in? I think I'll just say this group is really very motivated, and you've only met in person 3 times, but the virtual communication is fast and furious. And there are a lot of people who've taken on strong roles in whether it's research or wherever their area of interest is. This is a group of 15 community members. It's really driven by, it's not just that the co-chairs are not part of village government. Really, the 15 members who were appointed by the board are taking the lead on this and really taking it very seriously and looking into a lot of interesting approaches and information that we're going to, I'm sure, all be benefiting from. And so the 5 of us from village government who are part of this, 3 of us are here right now. It's Stuart, Quantel, and myself, and Lynn just stepped out of the room, and then John Fry, who has been on our planning board for a number of years. All of us are really acting as resources, and so it was really helpful to have Dana give that presentation at last week's meeting of recent and anticipated development, and she worked with Lynn to get all that information, and that's kind of the role, that's a good example of the role that we're playing, I think, in large part, those of us in village government. Lynn, as our director of planning, has that information, and Dana, as a community member on the committee, is asking the questions that, as a community member, she's interested in understanding and then reflecting it back to the committee. And so I thank everybody for really taking this very seriously. It's a real pleasure to serve on it with you. And then I'll just make sure everybody's marked their calendar, because it's July 26th is the presentation, when we are looking forward to hearing the recommendations from this very hardworking committee. So I'll let you know the Bedard Theater in the library is available. The committee can decide if they want to do it there as a possible location, if we want to invite more people in the community. So throw that out there. Sorry, I'm throwing that out there on television. I just don't want to forget, because I just confirmed that today.
Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, sorry.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. I just want to thank again all the hard work that you guys. I think you guys meet more often than this board meets.
Almost.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what the mayor said, it's a really incredible.
Thank you.
group of
Thank you for
people.
all that additional work. So I had a quick question. You said you have some subcommittees, so to speak, looking at different avenues of what the process should be. Is anyone in particular looking at the back analysis of projects that have been done through the village, like different studies that I'm not sure if you have that in mind as
Yeah.
well?
Part of what we proposed, and this was also proposed as a subcommittee, although this hasn't formed yet, is to analyze all the resources that we have, including starting with a comprehensive plan, but also all the other studies, and to gather those studies in and to summarize what's relevant, maybe what from those documents was recommended and is still an option for the village. But we are definitely planning on that. It's in our outline for what Justine, my co-chair, and I proposed for the final report, is to include a section doing exactly that.
And just so you know, before we even met, everybody had a copy or a link to the comp plan, to the density study that was done in 2014, to a couple of, like, the few of the big resources that we know everybody should become familiar with, and kind of as
The parking lot.
working. No, we haven't looked at the parking lot today, although people have been looking at what's on the website, and that's been circulated. So
Yeah, I'm not sure if that parking lot study or the analysis is in
you know, speaking of, there's a person on our committee who's really into the parking.
Yeah.
Maybe she should connect with Manny, because Manny is really the person on our board who is most attuned to what that's going on. He might be a good resource.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that to her.
Okay. So, anybody else?
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Great.
Okay, I'm up.
Thank you, Jeff. Next topic this evening, Mayor and Board, is a grant application discussion. Mayor, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you. Oh, can't I use the mouse? Thank you. Alrighty. So I'll start talking while this is warming up, so we can. It is grant application season for as far as economic development grants are going. I know I, for one, have had about a dozen emails come into my inbox, which all say the exact same thing, from everyone that we know who is in any way related to local government, letting us know that the governor has announced some of the big grant opportunities this year for economic development. And so with that in mind, I'm actually going to save that exciting portion of the grant presentation until the end. But it seems like a good opportunity to talk about what are a number of the grants that the village has applied for. Some we apply for every year, some we get, some we don't get. So let me give you we're going to have a little bit of a, what happens? Oh, there we go. Oh, too fast. Let's see. Oh, wow, this isn't going to work. Okay, so road paving. This is one of our perennial grants. We apply every year. It's state funding. And as you can see, if you add all of those up together between the CHIPS funding, the Pave New York funding, and the Extreme Winter Recovery, they all, in one form or another, pay for road paving. Some of them are allowed to be used for sidewalks and curb work, anything to do with road work. And that together adds up to almost $300,000. And really, paving roads is the foundation of what municipal government does. We pave the roads, we pick up the garbage, we make sure you have clean, reliable drinking water, and then that's kind of the foundation of what we need to do. And this is almost $300,000 we're getting this year. This is just the 2017-2018 funding that's been approved from New York State. And if we weren't getting this money from New York State, that would be coming out of all of our property taxes. So that's a big offset for us because we contribute more than that from a couple of different sources, primarily from it can be a capital expense out of our general fund, or sometimes we get to do paving in conjunction with water mainline replacement, because when we do major water projects, the road gets torn up enough that we have to do repairs and replacement of the road then. And when we do the roads, we do it all out. If you've been on Pine Avenue in the last year, you know that that was a major milling. Drainage is always a focus, because if you don't have good drainage, then your road's not going to last. And then fully repaved. And the village does a great job with their paving. We always wish we could do more, but having this nearly $300,000 from New York State grants, it goes a long way to helping us save local taxpayer dollars that go toward it. But all that text that you probably can't read because there's too much of it is really just to remind me to tell you about one of the kind of disappointments we had that's related to these grant funds. The Pave New York program, last year they expanded it to provide a Bridge New York grant fund. And as you can see, this picture here is our iconic double arch bridge. And the lower arch is the Broadway Bridge that's right by the community center. And if you've walked on our Sing Sing Kill Greenway, that's that little pathway there. You've seen the netting below it. That has a yellow flag. If it goes to a red flag, then the road gets shut down. So we need to redo that bridge. And we've started the design work on it. It's going to cost about $1 million. We were very disappointed not to get the Bridge New York grant. We're hopeful that if the grant application process is offered again this year, that it'll be offered in time for us to be able to apply for that grant a second time and be able to get that funding to help offset this project. But the project's going to happen one way or the other, and it's an expensive infrastructure project, but a necessary one. So if we can get that grant, that would certainly help a lot. Okay, so water is another one of our huge infrastructure investments that we make here in the village. And kudos to Andy Teese. That's Andy right there, standing on the old top of the spillway, and right behind him is our 100-plus-year-old earthen dam. The dam had to be replaced. We were required to replace it. That is a very big project. We've had it, as I said, for over 100 years. That body of water there is Indian Brook Reservoir. We get a large portion of our drinking water comes right from that reservoir, goes through the dam, and then right behind where Andy is standing is the Indian Brook water filtration plant. I will show you in a moment. I'll just click ahead to give you, that's what the reservoir looks like right now. And that's the spillway right where Andy is standing. That's what it looks like now, because the construction is nearly complete. And soon we look forward to refilling the reservoir so we can be drawing on our own water. But I'm going to click back for one moment just to give you a little more insight into this water demand management program. Ossining was the first community to jump on this opportunity. It was presented to us by New York City, their DEP, because New York City has some major projects that they're going to be doing for their water source. We are one of their biggest customers. I believe we are their 11th largest customer in New York State. And because of that, we had access to this grant money. It is $290,000 that is coming to the village. And Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're nearly done with the contract documents so that money can be distributed. Is that correct?
I would think actually sometime in June the city will have the final approval. So we have already signed off from our end.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and so that $290,000 is going to be dedicated to conserving water. In large part, that is already underway, because as a part of this study, we have upgraded significantly our leak detection and repair program. We've streamlined the diagnosis, and we have found some really, I guess it's great news. We found some big leaks, which means we are now saving over 400,000 gallons a day of water. There was a particularly large break out past just off the side of Route 9A, which is a very odd location. And when we found that one and we were able to repair that, they made a huge difference. And as a result of all of the leak detection and diagnosis and repairs we've been doing, we're now saving about $300,000 a year in purchased water. Water that we no longer have to purchase from New York City. When the grant comes to fruition and we're able to distribute that money, part of it is actually going to be an incentive program direct to water customers. If you would like to upgrade to a low-flow toilet, we will pay for your toilet. So that is one of the programs. And then so the others are going to continue with the identifying leaks, doing repairs, and water conservation methods of that nature. So kudos to Andy Teese and to Paul Frioli for jumping on this opportunity. Environmentally, it's obviously a smart thing to do, but just from a cost savings and efficiency for our infrastructure, it's a big deal. This is the dam that we were talking about, this dam project, this 100-year-old earthen dam. You're now facing the other direction. That picture of Andy before was looking where we're now standing. If you hear Andy's reports each month, he says that the reservoir is at 5% capacity, and we are buying 100% of our water from New York City, and you can see why. This project has been underway for years. And a few years ago, it was the DEC who required us to do the dam program, and they said, but wait, there's a terrific funding opportunity. There's dam safety funds. It's coming from FEMA, and you are the perfect project for it. And so we applied, and we waited, and we asked, and our state representative asked, both of them, a number of times, what's going on with this funding? And they said, well, we don't know, we'll see. And then eventually, after a couple of years, they said, no, forget it, this isn't the kind of project that we want to fund. So meanwhile, we hadn't moved forward with our dam project, but at least we got a no, so we could move forward with the project. And there is one sort of advantage to having waited a couple of years, because now we're further along with knowing the future infrastructure for the development of the filtration plant on the other side. And so as the dam is being built, where I'm standing, where in the dirt for that picture on the left, there's a 5-foot, so as tall as me, I could stand in this pipe that goes from the water through the dam. And when it comes out the other side, it will now be located in an optimal spot for where the future construction will be on the other side. So that was one advantage. But this is a multi-million-dollar project, and it would have been great to have some of that FEMA money go toward it. So here are some of the grants that we have gotten, albeit it's a little laborious to actually get the paperwork processed from the Dormitory Authority from New York State. But Senator David Carlucci is very eager to help the municipalities he represents to be able to fund projects. And so these are a few of the ones we've gotten recently. You're all familiar with our streetscaping we've done downtown. The last portion of it that was completed was on Secor Road. Originally, that had been intended to be a CDBG project before crazy stuff happened with the CDBG funding. So we had some money set aside for that was intended to be matching for the CDBG funds that dried up when HUD came into the county. I'll refer to that again in a few moments. But then $50,000 of it has been earmarked from New York State, the Dormitory Authority, thanks to David Carlucci, that it looks like we'll be getting now this year, right? The work was done 3 years ago, but the paperwork 3 years later looks like it's going to come through. Similarly, $50,000 to help offset the installation cost of the LED streetlights, which you don't get better programs than that. That's already paying for itself. And we're grateful to have even more of an offset by this Dormitory Authority grant. And then there's $100,000 that was initially earmarked for a fire boat, which is now shifting toward another piece of emergency apparatus, probably one of the fire engines. And that I thought it was decided, and now they're still figuring it out. But okay. So you heard me mention CDBG. Those are Community Development Block Grants. For a number of years, those grants, we participated in a consortium of municipalities that represented 34 different municipalities in Westchester County. But then HUD came in and said, oh, no, Westchester County, you're not distributing these funds properly. Most of these municipalities are not actually compliant with HUD guidelines. And you may be aware there was a major lawsuit that dragged on for a number of years. The Village of Ossining was one of only 3 of the 34 municipalities that was not in trouble with HUD. However, because we were part of this consortium, this entire funding source dried up for us during the time that the case was being settled, and now the funds are available in a different way. And right now we are the recipient of a grant of just over $295,000 that and we are, let's see if I get the language right here. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn, but we're the applicant, and then IFCA is the subrecipient. And IFCA is using that funding to rehabilitate 2 of their affordable housing properties here in the village of Ossining. So that's a good example of the village. Sometimes a municipality has to be the recipient and the applicant of a grant, and there might be an opportunity for us to partner with other organizations. In fact, I'll just refer back to I talked about DASNY grants. There's also something called SAM grants, and I'm afraid I don't recall what SAM stands for. It's one of the other state funding sources. And at the June 14th meeting, we're going to be having a visit from Jerry Fiella, who is the head of the Historic Hudson River Towns organization, and also the executive director of the Sing Sing Prison Museum project. And the Sing Sing Prison Museum has applied for and gotten a number of grants from a variety of sources, and the next one they're applying for, they are hoping that the village will take the lead on that, and that's a SAM grant. And so Jerry's going to be coming to us in a couple of weeks for us to learn more about that potential opportunity for the village to again facilitate, which does have a little bit of work from our staff. The finance office steps in and helps with processing the funding sources and taking the money in and distributing it. And thankfully we have a staff that is not only capable of this, but very familiar with it and has done it for a number of opportunities. And I will also mention at this time that the town of Ossining, let me see if I can pull up, Dana sent me all of the details. I'm not sure if I certainly couldn't go into as much detail as she did, but you may recall that the town of Ossining is working on, right now they're in the design stages for a grant to do a greenway connecting all of our municipalities with the trailways. I guess we call it the Greenway Grant or the Trailway Grant. And the town took the lead, but the village signed on, the town of Newcastle and the village of Briarcliff, to develop a plan for an open space / bike lane / commerce connectivity corridor, which would create enhanced pedestrian and bike access between commercial zones and open space in the Ossining and Newcastle area, including the Ossining train station in downtown, North State Road, Millwood Hamlet, and North County Trail. So it's an intermunicipal task force, and we're really happy to be part of that. It's another example of grant money. All of these are grants that come into our community from one avenue or another and are investing in our community, whether it's in affordable housing, greenway grants, road work, or water infrastructure. There's an awful lot of grant money that either we directly apply for or we partner with other entities or agencies to bring in. So this is the big thing that's on the table right now. It's our economic development grant. The Regional Economic Development Council is a state organization. And last year they started this mega grant. We are in the Mid-Hudson region. There are 7 counties in the Mid-Hudson region. We're the southernmost. It goes up to like Ulster and Sullivan and everything in between. Last year we applied for this, the Village of Ossining did, and we were one of 7 finalists in the entire Mid-Hudson region for this grant. You win if you get 10 million. If you don't get 10 million, you get 10 minutes to talk to people and hope that you can apply the next year, and that's where we're at. But it was a really great opportunity for us to elevate the visibility of the village. It was basically a 10-minute commercial for how terrific we are and what wonderful opportunities there are for economic development here. And it was me and Lynn and one of the volunteer members of our Downtown Development Fund Council. It was held at Regeneron, and there's 22 voting members in the Regional Economic Development Council, and they're really some heavy hitters in the economic development world. So it was a good opportunity, and it has opened some doors for us here in the village, and it may come as no surprise to anyone that grant funding is somewhat political, and it means a lot of time spent making really great connections and telling everybody just how wonderful we are and all the resources we have to make great things happen. And so we should be the worthy recipients of all of the grant opportunities that are relevant to us. Similarly, this same group does consolidated funding applications. And while the DRI just started last year, which is specific to downtown revitalization, consolidated funding applications actually could be for a number of different kinds of grants. And I've listed a bunch of them here. It's community development. there are sustainability and energy related ones. There's waterfront specific, workforce development. And I also want to point out that this is not limited to municipalities to apply for. For-profit businesses could be recipients of CFA applications. And if you are a for-profit business that's going to apply for this, then the village has and would, I'm sure, be very happy to, in the future, draft an additional a letter of support and encouraging, because that's just more money that comes into our community and is going to help a business to succeed, provide more work, provide more vitality to our community. And there are also opportunities for nonprofit organizations to apply for CFA grants. It's called the Consolidated Funding Application because it's an online application that they think is really so much easier and more streamlined. It's actually a little complex, but part of that is because it's one application that is shared with a long list of departments and agencies within New York State, so that you can do one application and it may be relevant to a variety of funding sources. Am I making sense so far? Okay. To be able to do our very best job and have the best shot with this, we're always trying to make strong connections and learn more about exactly what New York State is looking for. They have all kinds of guidelines. There's a 28-page book on how to actually do the CFA application online. Plus, there's another whole guidebook on everything about the RADC, looking back to the DRI program last year and next year. But then a lot of it has to do with they actually have workshops, and I'm going to be participating in a webinar tomorrow that's being provided by what's CSE? What does it stand for? Climate Smart Communities. So I anticipate that they're going to be focused, it's just CFA grants, I anticipate they're going to be focused on some of the sustainability and energy and environmental improvement grant opportunities. We'll see if we have projects that make sense to be able to apply for CFA this year. And then next week I'm going to be attending a special session that's being provided on both grant opportunities, both the DRI and the CFA. And that's a special session that the Economic Development, Regional Economic Development Council Executive Director for our region will be there, and it's been organized by Pattern for Progress, which, thanks to all my board members just last week, we decided that we would officially become an urban action, what do we call ourselves? Urban Action Agenda Community. Pattern for Progress is a nonprofit that is very heavily involved with this program, with these state programs. In fact, they were, I believe, the consultants that came in and are working with the this year's recipient of the $10 million grant. So we're really pleased to have an opportunity to go up there for a special session that's just for these 25 communities that they've identified as urban action agenda communities. And we are the newest member of that. Any questions? Actually, for you guys. Board? Staff? Anybody else want to ask a 2-second question before I sit down and let all the folks from Beach Road hear about Snowden Woods?
I'm just curious if you are such professionality to make these applications. So how does that work?
Well, some of it's in-house, and some of it is, for example, I should say that when we were talking about for example, the water infrastructure grants, that's really a lot of technical work. And our water superintendent, Andy Teese, has already been participating in panel discussions with our elected officials because drinking water is one of the top priorities of Governor Cuomo. So we know there's funding out there, and so we're trying to have as much access to that as possible. So he is working with the designers who have done a lot of design work for us for our drinking water systems, and working with them to look into what applications we can apply for. And so finding the right consultants who have the expertise, as well as then making the connection with the folks who are going to be able to tell us what the decision makers want. That's, you know, that's probably going to make or break us in the future.
It's a skill.
Yes, and it's different because just hiring somebody who is a grant writer is it makes a lot of sense, but the more that I learn about it, I realize it's not just one person who's good at writing up a grant. It's got to be a variety of people who are connected in different ways for each different program and specialty. And the foundation of it, though, really has to come from those of us here in village government that are on the ground and know exactly what's happening and who the resources are internally to draw from. Okay, thank you, Stuart. It's all you.
I was just gonna make a comment. I wanted to thank the mayor for that presentation. Village government municipal government in general is an interesting place. Why don't you wait till I'm done? You get to do that. That's great. I understand we're trying to move things along. But Victoria's put a lot of energy into this. This is a big mission of hers. And, you know, given the state of the executive branch of the federal government and Congress, and given the fact that, you know, we're probably not going to see much from them. So the real creativity and the real resources are going to come through state and local resources. And, you know, we're looking at everything here in this village. We're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at energy savings, we're looking at every way we can to extract as much economic resources as we can to save everybody taxpayer money. I mean, that we should be getting that money back, and we are really doing everything we can to do that. And I'll remind everybody that you know, even with the revaluation, we had a 0% increase in our taxes this year, okay? And I can tell you that that's something that's very important to me, and it should be important to everybody who's sitting there, because we all know that everybody else is, maybe in the county, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But here in Ossining, we've been doing the right things financially, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to drive to get money from the outside so we can make the best community we can here. And again, thanks again, Victoria, for that presentation. You can see how broad and sweeping it is and all the different opportunities there are for us to take advantage of grants. Thank you.
We want to
Carry on.
Thank you. I'll fill my water glass. Make it noisy. Quick.
As the screen folds up, we will move to our next topic. Mayor and members of the board, and for most of the folks in the audience tonight, this is an update on the Snowden Woods project. And just so everyone in the who's watching and who's in the audience knows, there's no representative from the developer here tonight. I am advising the board that on May the 15th, we received the application for a change or proposed change to the zoning code, chapter 270 of the Village of Ossining Code. And I have provided all of you with the documents that accompanied that application. And very briefly, it is a proposal to create an overlay district known as a preservation density overlay, which would encompass the area where the proposed Snowden Wood project is. The project, based upon the documents provided, consists of 198 units. I believe it's 4 buildings, 2 with 66 units each, 2 with 33 units each. Also, I sent to all the board members earlier today a letter that I received from Attorney Clifford Davis, who is in the audience. Dated today's date, Mr. Davis is the attorney for Jeffrey Smith, setting forth the opposition to the requested zoning change. Again, this has just been received, just so the board knows what the status is with regard to the planning board part of this application. There were documents that were submitted in February by the developer to the planning board. They were submitted in electronic format only. There were no hard copies, no CDs at that time, and in fact, no filing fee provided at that time. What we have been advised, or what I have been advised by the attorney for the developer, is that when the referral from this board goes to the planning board, at that point, the remaining issues on the planning application would be submitted, including any fees. But at this point, I just wanted to bring the members up to date to know that the application has been received. I think it would be a good idea that perhaps at our next work session, we have a representative in from the developer who would be able to answer any questions that we may have with regard to that. I know we have a number of things, I think, already on for the 14th, but if we have to, then we would put that back, and we can obviously discuss that. But I did just want the board to know that that has come in, and I provided everyone with copies that came in today. We did get Mr. Davis's letter. If anyone in the audience, in addition to Mr. Davis, on behalf of Mr. Smith or anyone out there, has any objections, please send them through, and I will be happy to transmit all of those to the members of this board. So they will have that. And just for fairness' sake, it also is going to the attorney representing the developer so that they can know exactly what those comments are. And just so everyone knows what the process is, where a request for a zoning text amendment has been made, the board, the process is to refer the matter to the planning board. The planning board then has 62 days to provide a recommendation. The recommendation is returned back to the Board of Trustees. They conduct a public hearing, at which time a determination is made following that public hearing. But there is a process that has to be followed with regard to this, and particularly with regard to this proposed zoning amendment, which is to, in fact, as I've said before, add a full overlay district to that area. So there's a lot of work to be done before that referral is made, but I did want to just bring the board up to date that has occurred, and it has been received, because it was something that we had been expecting for a little bit from the developer, and have now in fact received. So I just wanted to make that clear, and so that everyone in the audience knows. I just so it's also clear, those who actually sent letters to the village indicating their objection, I think I've received personally 3. I notified those folks, and I see there are many other people here, so obviously follow the agenda. Again, if anyone else has anything else they'd like for purposes of submission, they can get it to me, they can get it to the Director of Planning, and it will obviously get to the board, so it can be made part of the record. My contact information, my name is Stuart Kahan, K-A-H-A-N. You can email me at kahan@villageofossining.org, or you can call me at 941-3554, extension 101. And I'm actually, if you want to stop by, I'm just up on the 2nd floor here. Yes, Joe.
Stuart, the document that we received is pretty voluminous.
Right.
Is this document available electronically?
I will ask that it, actually, I do have it on, I have it on disk, and I will have them send it to me electronically. I got 4 copies of disks, but I will have them actually put it down so I can get it to everybody electronically, so it can be made available that way as well.
Because this has been presented at a public meeting, is the application itself now free to be viewed by the public itself?
I would see no reason why not, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess I would ask that, to the extent that it be available to the public, so that people know that they can go and see what the proposal is. You know, there's a lot here. I mean, it's a pretty big ask.
What I can say, because we have received already 1 FOIL request with regard to documents, and that was actually responded to by me over the last day or so, and what it was effectively was submitting most of the documents that were submitted to the planning board, a lot of which are in here, the EAF, the traffic study, and so to the extent that the particular application, I'll get it in an electronic format, and it can be provided to anyone who wants it, because it is a public document that has been filed and is now recorded in our offices.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I was actually going to ask the same question, so I have nothing else to add. I think it's fair for the public and for the community members or the neighbors to actually see what the proposal is and what they're asking for the board to do.
Absolutely.
So it's essential for that to be public, obviously. So
We'll have that. We'll make that all available to everybody.
So subsequent to the 60.
Okay, let me just say, generally in work sessions, because I did sort of a chatty back and forth with the grant application presentation. No, we actually don't take, this is usually a work session just for staff and for board, although it is a public meeting, so people are welcome to come. The first and third Wednesdays at our legislative session, we do have visitor recognition. People can come and speak on any topic they want for up to 3 minutes, but we're not going to have we've got a full room of people and a long agenda, so we're just going to stick to staff discussion.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody that has an opinion about this to come to our legislative sessions. You know, we we do take comments about anything that's going on within the municipality. So I would hope you would all take advantage of that to come and share your opinion.
Entertain a question now?
No, not in a work session.
Not opinion, but a question.
If you want to, if you have a question, I would reach out to Councilor Kahan here. He will provide you with any information he can, and if not, he'll consult with us and we'll provide you with any answers we can. If we don't know, we'll find out.
Thank you, Mayor.
No further questions.
Yeah, okay, I'll just say, this, this arrived on our table today.
Correct.
I've certainly been aware of a number of the letters that have come through, and I've recently taken a walk myself down Sandy Drive to kind of have a look from that side of it. It's a complicated ask and a complicated potential development, and we're still pretty early in the process of figuring out a path forward. So, thank you. It sounds like they still have paperwork that they need to get into the planning board for that process to
To the
actually
planning
begin
board, yeah.
officially.
But at least from the board's perspective in terms of the amendment part, that's here. And, that process, and that's why I just wanted to bring it up so that everyone knows that it's here and that process has started.
Thanks. I'll look forward to the electronic copy.
Got it. Mayor, next, we turn to zombie properties,
All right.
which
Sounds a lot more fun than it is.
sort of like Night of the Living Dead for real estate. And in December, on December 20th, in fact, a number of changes were made to New York State real property actions and proceedings law relating to abandoned properties. And they are in many ways beneficial to municipalities to take certain actions with regard to abandoned properties. One of the significant things, and I'll go through a lot of this, but one of the issues that was developed and is now law is that there is what's going to be called a vacant and abandoned registry of residential properties. And these are all properties, and just so,
So just hold on 1 second, because
Yeah.
there's a little rustling as folks, which is fine. There's a lot of people stepping out at the same time. Let's just take a moment's pause.
got it.
So we didn't have a registry before, or?
Ours is going to be different. The state has not.
Sure.
Okay, got you.
Okay. I'm sorry, Stuart.
Oh,
Continue
that's
with
fine.
zombie properties.
No problem. Just for definitional purposes, what we're referring to colloquially as a zombie property is essentially a property where the owner has most likely left the building, is still the owner in name, and no foreclosure proceeding has yet been started. So it is essentially an abandoned house that no one is maintaining. And the question was essentially, what do you do with those homes? In all municipalities, Ossining included, those homes exist. They're blights on both the neighborhood. They're obviously a drain for a variety of reasons. One of the things that the new legislation has created is this registry. And the homes that are involved here are 1 to 4 family homes. And basically, if the home is considered to be vacant and abandoned, and I'll get into that in a moment, the servicer, the loan servicer, must report that to the Department of Financial Services. They will be creating a registry of all those homes. And it's a confidential list. However, Mayor, in your capacity as the chief elected officer for the village, you can request the list specifically for Ossining. And that would then allow us to know specifically what homes and where the servicers have considered that there are homes that are considered vacant and abandoned. And the process begins 90 days after the loan goes into delinquency. At that point, the servicer sends a notice out essentially to find out, is there anyone there? Is it being occupied? And the ways of determining vacant and abandoned are pretty simple. There are a lot of newspapers outside. There are electric bills coming out of the mailbox. Does it look like there's no one living there? Are the blinds off the rooms? It's simply like that. And essentially, initially, it's an exterior examination that they will go around and they'll make a determination. And then what they're supposed to do, and when I say they, I mean the servicer, is over the next 25 to 35 days on 3 separate increments, they will have to go back to the house to see if there's anyone actually there. And if there's no one there, the house is then considered vacant and abandoned. It can also be determined to be vacant and abandoned by the municipality, and I'll get into that in a second because there's another way that the village can get involved, or by court order. If the building is found to be vacant and abandoned, it not only obligates the servicer to maintain the exterior of the building, but the servicer also must take care of violations inside the building. He must essentially bring the building up to code if it's outside, if it's in violation. And that continues until the building is no longer considered vacant or abandoned, i.e. there's been a foreclosure and it's been sold. Someone goes into bankruptcy. All things that are specific in the statute. What's important here in terms of what the village can do is that if the village makes a determination that the building needs to be repaired because of violations, the village can give notice to the servicer. They give, I believe it's 10 days written notice, and the village can then go in and make the repairs. And unlike a lot of our situations where if a repair is made, it gets charged to the building as part of a tax bill, this gets actually charged to the servicer. And the village has the authority to go into court, not only to get its fee for making the repair, but also $500 a day in a civil penalty. And by law, the civil penalty is payable directly to the municipality. It doesn't go to anyone else. The law, in fact, provides that. You're looking at me like,
Well,
but I'm just...
I don't think that we get to determine if that actually is enforced. But
Well, I'm just,
Okay.
I can only read to you what the ordinance says.
yes, okay.
Because a lot of them
$500
don't,
a day penalty would
don't
be
actually
unlikely, but-
provide where it goes. This one actually says it goes to, but what it
Okay.
does say is that in terms of any repairs that have to be made, the municipality charges the servicer or the mortgage company, which is better because in a lot of times if it's an abandoned house, you're in a situation where you're never going to get that money back.
So I assume that this, by putting a potential financial burden on the servicer to ensure that the property is maintained, both its exterior and its interior, that puts pressure on them to actually not just fix it, but then to have it no longer be vacant and abandoned, which is in everyone's best interest.
Right. Ultimately, the idea of giving them notice before, there's two ideas of notice here. One is that you're going to give them notice that you're going to go in the house. And the second is you give notice to the state that you're actually going to sue for the village to actually recover the funds. The idea of giving notice to the servicer is because the servicer may say, well, we'll go in and take care of it. We don't want the village. And I'm sure my children have seen that and are going to enjoy that tonight. There we go. Okay. Well, in any event, good night. It's been one of those weeks so far. But what happens is, in terms of how the property works out, the notice essentially says to the mortgage company, you need to get in there and take care of this now, because if you don't, they're going to come in, they have the right to come in, and they'll make all the repairs that have to be made.
I just want to ask a question to define servicer.
Loan servicer is the party that basically handles the day-to-day operation of the loan. It's important to know it's not necessarily the bank.
Right.
It could be a company like Ocwen, which is one of the biggest loan servicers around. In fact, the law has certain exemptions as to who is not covered by these reporting requirements. A state-chartered bank that writes mortgages that account for less than 0.3% of the total mortgages written in the state of New York is not covered by this. But your servicers, which are the main entities that handle most of these mortgages now, because they're ultimately picked up by the servicers, they're the ones who are the responsibles, the Ocwens in those particular groups. And that's how, and servicer is defined in the regulations as that particular type of agency, as compared to the mortgagee, which is the entity that actually loans the funds. But you could get the recovery from either the servicer or the mortgagee. The municipality can.
And it doesn't matter where they're incorporated, just where the property is?
Right. What you're allowed to do is to bring a lawsuit in any jurisdiction any court that has jurisdiction over the case. You probably could not bring it in the justice court here because they have limited jurisdiction over defendants. You could bring it in Westchester County Court because all of those servicing companies are subject to service in New York State. But that's something that the law provides that can be done. The important thing that what this does is it allows these properties before there's a foreclosure to be maintained. So that it's not just that the grass is getting cut outside, but it requires, for example, that if there's air conditioning units inside, you got to turn them off. If there's plumbing, you got to make sure everything's taken care of. The servicer essentially, once it's deemed vacant and abandoned, they are then effectively on the hook for making sure that that place is maintained. And it's up to the building department of the particular municipality to make sure that's being done. But if it is not being done, the municipality has the right to go in. And if it's considered a matter of life safety, they don't have to wait 7 days of notice. They can literally just go into the building and do what they have to do. But, I think it's important, and the ability that we can get a copy of the registry to know who within Ossining, where those homes are, is important, because it would then allow the building department to just make sure what's going on, and also to cross-check, is this a building that we've already written a violation on? And if not, we don't have to worry about the fact that the owner is not there. We can go to the servicer and say, you're the ones who now have to fix that violation. Without knowing for sure, I would suspect there are a number of places that fit within that. And again, just remember, it only refers to 1 to 4 family homes. It doesn't go beyond that. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what about any kind of mixed use? Like if there's businesses on the first floor and then there's apartments above, does that qualify?
The way it's written is it only refers to residential. It only is residential, and they define residential as 1 to 4 families. So there's no reference to commercial or anything like that. I would think that I would suspect that a mixed use probably falls outside of what this is. I think you're only looking at residential housing stock within the particular location.
Well, let me just express my disappointment in that, because my general anecdotal observation of buildings in disrepair tend to be of mixed use, at least a lot of the ones that I've observed. So I'm obviously happy for the opportunity to make sure that the servicers are on the hook for making sure the houses are taken care of and repaired and what have you. So from our perspective, this is a state law at this point?
This is a state law at this point. What I am just determining is whether or not the village needs to effectively adopt an ordinance which would give it the authority to go on its own, to authorize, for example, the corporation council with the authority of the board to bring an action against a servicer if deemed necessary. The law gives it. We may not have to do that, but what I would suggest, obviously, is when I get the form from the state, is to present it to the mayor so that we can get the list with regard to the locality, the homes here, and that's a list that would get updated every year. The services are required to quarterly report, and it's not, and the state is very careful on how that list gets out. It is not subject to FOIL, and only within the municipality can you get it. So you could here only get within the village of Ossining with those particular homes.
When will you? You were saying that you weren't sure whether we need to actually adopt this into
Right.
our own code.
The reason I'm saying that is, in many other state ordinances, it says if the locality adopts this. It doesn't say that here. It simply says the municipality may do this. In fact, can go to that, and I'll be able to advise the board fairly quickly if it's necessary. And it would pretty much go in lockstep with what is the current amendment to the Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law, as to whether or not there's a requirement that we add something in here. Two things to note, though. To the extent that, and we do not have a registry at this point in the village, but it would be important to know we are not prohibited from having a registry on our own of vacant and abandoned homes. However, based upon the language in the statute, we can't have a registry that covers the loan servicers who are in fact already covered by the state law. So if you want to have a registry for owners, which is effectively what you could do, you're allowed to do that. New York state law allows you to do that. You just basically can't do something that the state has already done. They've sort of carved out a restriction saying they're the only ones who are going to create that particular statewide registry. But if you want to have a registry of what you simply call abandoned buildings based upon what an owner and determine what abandonment is, the village is free to do that and can create, and absolutely can create its own list.
And why can't the village therefore create a registry for commercial abandoned and vacant?
There's no reason they could not. The only exception dealt with the only exception dealt with residential as covered within this statute. But the answer is there's no reason that you could not create one, a registry for commercial as well as mixed use or anything like that. Absolutely.
We have to do that through state, or we just can do our own?
You could do your own. Many localities have registries. City of Yonkers has
So-
a vacant building registry already.
Do that.
So that can.
And then what does that allow us to do?
Well,
with
a
that
vacant
information?
building registry is a few things. One, the owners have to register that the building is in fact vacant. The owner would be put under certain obligations to maintain the building. There are, and I'll have to get the full code Yonkers has, but there are certain obligations that particular owner has if in fact it's considered to be an abandoned building. And they have to renew that notification every year because it could, abandonment has to be a specifically defined term as to what it means to be abandoned. For example, under the state law, if your building was destroyed due to some natural disaster, it's not considered abandoned, obviously. Even if you haven't lived there for 6 months, but the state at least put that in there. But you can absolutely have a registry because it at least affords you, at least for those landlords or owners who tell you that, you know which buildings there's no one at, and where you may need that the police may have to have an extra presence at that particular location, or that there's an issue as to maybe garbage accumulation or something like that. But more importantly, you have a name of an owner who you can actually get in touch with because that owner is the one who has notified you that the building is in fact vacant. But there is nothing that stops any locality from creating such a list as long as it doesn't overlap with what the state has already created under their registry.
So, question, because I just Googled real quick. Now, the Office of Economic Development, they used to have like some type of registry about vacant commercial properties.
Which
Over here in the village?
Yeah, because there's actually a form available online.
I think they called it vacant, but really it was available properties.
Okay.
It was like a real estate listing.
Okay, because I do remember.
It wasn't like abandoned and vacant. It was like
Available
opportunities.
Okay,
It was the terminology might have possibly been
Okay,
a little more
alright,
positively
okay.
stated.
Okay, I just wanted to see if.
No, with that I was not familiar with.
It was really a real estate listing of available commercial properties. If it's the list I'm
Okay,
thinking of
alright.
from the.
One other thing I wanted to just bring to your attention as I was going through all this, there's another section of the state law, and it's actually been around surprisingly since 1974. It deals with abandonment of buildings, and it provides, in very short drift, is that if a municipality determines that a building is abandoned and provides a certification to that effect, and after notifying everybody that it's abandoned, they can go into court and the title to the building will be turned over to the village. Becomes the village's property.
All right, well, I don't want any more property, but I could certainly do with less vacant.
Well, here's the
Mixed use is
no, but-
complicated.
Yeah.
Here's what's nice about this particular statute. The way it works is, and let's assume you have a mortgage or whatever. You have to notify the mortgage company. You have to notify the servicer. So you go into court. The judge may then turn to the servicer and say, "I'll tell you what. I'm not going to give it to the village for 6 months. You have 6 months to bring a foreclosure and sell the house and get it up to code." you don't do, and in 6 months come up, they may say, well, we have a buyer, we're gonna do it in a month. The judge will say, you know what, I'll give you one more month. Coming in that 7th month, it's not done, the judge will say, fine, turn the house, and they turn the house over to the village free and clear of every lien. It is,
So what if it's, this is, now you're not just talking about 1 to 4 families. Now you're talking
No,
about any
no,
vacant and abandoned
no,
property.
actually, no, it unfortunately does not go that far.
Oh.
Because this is again under the real property. I'd like to tell you
Oh,
that.
because I had
This-
asked about commercial. I
this-
guess we flip back to residential.
Well,
in your
you asked
policy.
me about a registry for commercial.
Right.
A registry for commercial can absolutely be done.
Okay, but now you're on to
What I'm
residential.
talking now is under the Real Property Action Proceedings Law. This only applies, actually, let me just change what I just said. It's only for residential,
Okay.
but the exception here is it would not apply to 1 or 2 family owner occupied. So other than 1 or 2 family owner occupied, if there's a house on one of our streets that's a 3-family, or a 2-family that's not owner occupied, and it is abandoned, and there's a certification from the village that it's abandoned, and no one comes into court for the property, the village could in
Well, the
fact
whole
go
thing
into
has
court.
to be abandoned. not-
Yeah, well, that's the
not
thing. Like,
one of the
I mean,
units,
if
the
it's
entire
obviously
thing.
not owner occupied, because if it's occupied, it's not abandoned and vacant, right? Or
Well, that's
or is it just? But all units have
the
to be
way
abandoned
it says
and
it
vacant.
this article shall not apply to a 1 family or a 2-family dwelling occupied by the owner thereof. So clearly, if the owner is occupying it,
Yeah.
the idea is,
But if a tenant
not-
is
it's not
occupying
abandoned.
it, then it's not abandoned, right?
right,
Not
but
abandoned.
let's say you have a building that there's, well, that's right, well, but there's a difference here.
Please.
And I apologize because I'm not being as clear as I should be.
We're interrupting and asking. a
No,
lot
no,
of
the
questions.
difference is this. The way this statute determines it is there's 2 different things. A dwelling under this statute can be abandoned even if it's occupied. For example, they haven't paid rent for a particular period of time. They haven't they haven't put oil in the fuel tanks for a particular. It's just what the state has it. On the other hand, it can also be abandoned if it's vacant, and you could have a 2-family house that's just sitting there. And in those kind of situations, if there is a certification by the village that it is abandoned for that reason, considered abandoned, the village can start a proceeding whereby it would be permitted to ultimately take over the property.
So the reason to follow through with this is to try and compel these properties to get foreclosed and have somebody and get them up to code so that somebody's actually living in
Right.
them.
I mean,
Or we take possession of it and then we
Yeah.
do something
yeah, that's right.
wise for the community.
Fix it or get rid of it.
But what you're basically doing is giving a great amount of time to, be it a servicer, be it an owner or someone who can come in and basically say, I'm going to do what I can to try to fix this up. And in fact, if you don't, it gets turned over. The idea that it gets turned over with no lien is really, I mean, that's the hammer throughout any of this, because you get a house that's free and clear. That some of these, that could, if you're a mortgage, if you're a bank, you don't want that to happen.
Yes,
if
but
you're-
then we own a property that is disheveled and filthy and has broken windows, and now we become the responsible party to. We can't be owners who then have a property that is in that shape either.
I didn't say
We
it
have
was-
to mow the lawn and.
Quantel, do you have any thoughts on what opportunities there might be for a property like that? Are there any agencies you can think of that might be helpful?
I won't speak to agencies, but I will say that
I was even thinking of state agencies, not even just.
well, there definitely is there's definitely CDBG home funds that could be used. Municipalities or the municipality could always set up a land bank. That would be something that you could do. So,
Can I say something now?
Yeah, please.
I've been holding this out for a while now.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, no.
We've been
it's just-
peppering Stuart with questions.
which is fine. There's not really questions. I just actually want to make sort of a statement in a way, because I was going over through my emails. So March 26, 2000, I sent an email to the board at that time, including Corporation Council and everybody else in there, in regards to vacant properties and everything that we just talked about, registries and everything. 2013, I sent that email again in regards to that. 2014, I did the same thing. January 17, 2017. I sent that to Stuart. Thank you for bringing this back to our attention. I really appreciate all the hard work that you have been putting in there. I sent that to the whole board. There's some links in different municipalities that do have these kind of laws, these kind of registrations for vacant commercial properties, residential stuff. I think that's something that we have to look into. I know the state has some of that stuff. We can piggyback in some of the property maintenance building code that we can use now that we pass 1203. I think we can take a lot of the advantage on those laws. So again, Stuart, thank you very much for bringing back to the floor. This is, my recollection is correct. This is actually the first time that we actually bring it back into a work session mode, so to speak, and I really appreciate that. So if we can put something together, that'd be really awesome. I think that's something that our village can definitely use in some properties around the area here. So.
Thank you, Stuart. Less than 6 months. There's so many reasons to be thankful for Stuart every time we get to leave him.
Knocks off microphones, doesn't it? Okay, thank you.
We didn't hire you for your sound
Oh,
knowledge.
thank
I just want to
Thank
ask Stuart one more question. So this excludes corporation holdings, right? So condos are not part of this. We have
No,
Camp Woods, which is a part of some other sort of organization. There's a couple of other where it's like either corporate or hello.
No way to sneak into these meetings.
No, no. No, he doesn't want to. So it excludes. Is that right? Because they're not servicers, and
no, the way it's
co-ops are shares, so they're definitely excluded.
It's definitely not co-ops or condos. That's for certain.
Okay.
But it's basically what it says, it's 1 to 4 family residential real property, and it's talking about and it's involving the first lien mortgage holder. I mean, that's basically how it is.
The corporations are excluded.
So, but that's, but in answer to your question, I mean, if the corporation were the owner of the building, that building could still be considered abandoned. I mean, it doesn't require that it be an individual owner of the building. So that
It's the kind of property, not who owns it.
Exactly
So 1
right.
to 4 family, whether it's owned by a nonprofit, by a
Right.
for-profit, by an individual.
would all be covered by this. Exactly right.
Great.
Nice.
So, and that went into effect the end of December. So it's only just starting to
Wow.
ramp up in
This is the new state law.
This is brand
this is the
new.
new state law. Yeah.
Well, they've been talking about it for a while, so
The last thing that it did do is it, and this is, I think, also to force the hand of some of the lenders, is that they can now, on these particular properties, expedite the foreclosure process. Because in New York, it's a dreadfully slow process. I think in Westchester, when I was doing them, could be 3 years until, from start
well,
to
it's a
finish.
protection of tenants. It's not it's a protection of different individuals, and it's
Well,
complicated.
It is.
You've got people who have,
You don't have to convince me.
Okay.
It's long enough. Okay.
I'm sold.
So that's our next topic is I think we have it listed as further discussion of reimbursement policy regarding attendance at fundraising events for nonprofit entities. I know we've all spoken about this, and I think effectively there's no need for the policy. We basically have what we have, so I think we're okay with that unless anyone has any questions. I think we can just move
No,
on to that.
the reason why it's on here is because the last time we discussed
We
it
did.
publicly, we left it thinking, oh, well, we'll do a policy to that effect, which just means that when we have certain expenses can be reimbursed, including a dinner if it's relevant to what you're doing for work. When it comes to nonprofits, the portion of the $60 contribution or whatever that actually covers the meal, we could turn in and get reimbursed, or we just have to get the nonprofit to tell us what it is.
It's fine.
And that's just consistent with the existing policy, so there's no need to have a new policy. It's
Correct.
just, we had a conversation, and by the end of the conversation, we kind of realized something. So we didn't want to, we realized it completely after the public meeting.
Right.
So this public statement of it's actually just an application of the existing policy. There's no new policy that needs to be written.
And just for the record, I'm against the whole thing.
Well, yeah, it's your choice. You don't have to. You don't have to submit the receipts.
Yeah, if you
That's
got
what-
to,
that's
if
what I'm
you
saying.
don't want to
Just for the
submit
record.
receipts, yeah, that's fine. Don't
Some
submit
of
the
us are
receipts.
better at keeping track of our receipts and actually submitting them, but in theory, like 2 years worth of receipts floating around my life. We'll see when I get those all put together. But okay, but
Now-
in theory, we should be able to. Do
Next, I have social
this.
media.
Our treasurer is laughing because he knows I've done it like twice in 5 years. But I do think it's important that it exists. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Next, I have social media. I'm going to ask the board for one last indulgence on this. I do have something put together, but I'd like to actually have it in front of all of you to see it. So if we could put this off, for a subsequent work session, because I'll actually have something in writing that everyone could see in advance. We could all discuss it rather than my just talking off the top, which I think would be easier. If that's okay. Last thing, it's not on the calendar. I think you may have all received it. That was the Clearwater resolution, which was sent around. I know some of you folks commented
did,
on
yeah.
it. And if you've had a chance to look at it, we can certainly, they sent it to us in Word format, so we can certainly adopt it, by putting in Village of Ossining and present it at the June 7th meeting, which I think is timely to get it to the folks at Clearwater so they can then put it with all the other resolutions and get it down to DC. So if that's okay, we can proceed with that, for the June 7th.
The only, yeah, please go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to ask if you. I mean, I read it. I actually asked to have it put on the agenda for tonight. Was there anything in there that where you had any concerns? Just legal advice. And,
No, I thought
it seemed pretty straightforward to
thought
me.
it-
So
I thought it was straightforward. I had no problem with it, and I think it's absolutely fine. I can, as I said, I can certainly just have it prepared. We'll put it in the Village of Ossining, and that will be that.
So the only thing that I circulated, I think to just Andy and Paul, and I may have CC'd you because it's a legal thing, is it's about safe, reliable drinking water. That's what this
Right.
this resolution is about. It's symbolic, but at the same time, it is actually relevant to federal policy and how that impacts us locally. And I didn't know if Paul and Andy had. Sometimes we make them a little more personalized. Sometimes we kind of put a little bit of our own spin of our community's values woven into it. So it's possible we may want to personalize
Well,
it a little
I'll-
bit before next week, and everybody could take a look at it.
That's absolutely fine. I'll hear from
Not
both
changing
of
the
them.
legal terminology. or
Otherwise, we can
relevance.
put that together, and we'll have it for them in advance of their trip. That's
Thank you.
all right. That's it.
Thank you.
Or are
Wow.
we going to do a recap of last week's?
Oh, I thought you guys did it before I got here.
No,
Okay.
we waited for you.
Oh,
You
for
did.
me.
You did the.
There were
recap.
3 of us there.
Well, but and I assume that
I'm
that's
going
what-
to go. Yeah, okay. I gotta open up. Didn't know. I thought you did it already. Hold on. Oh, I don't have to do that. Actually, Paul just left. So, was it only last week? It was last week. We met at Nelson Sitting Park, and 3 of the trustees were there. The other 2 were at a separate function here in the village. So it was Trustee Quezada, myself, Trustee Bazemore, and we met. We did somewhat of a public meeting with the school, who had requested of us to look at fencing in an area within Nelson Sitting Park. Where we are, and we were there. I counted about 31 or 32 people, plus our staff and the superintendent for Parks and Recreation, Chris Hoy, and the interim village manager was there, and I think Andy Teese was there. I'm trying to remember everybody off the top of my head. Yeah, Chris Hoy, yeah. And we had asked, we had sent out information for the folks that live right around the park to make sure that the local residents, as well as folks from the school, were there. And I would say, to recap, and I had about 8 points, but the most important piece of it is most of the folks that were there, whether they were for fencing in an area or against it for various reasons, really would like to see more of a write-up from the school who's actually requesting this, so that there is a clear understanding of what the fencing is, where, how big is it half the park, the whole park? I'm sorry.
I'm
Did you
sorry. I
have a
just
question?
wanted to clarify that just to take a walk back.
Yeah.
The school had come to us and requested the use of the park for some of their school children, right? Or for some of
The
the
school
children.
had come to the
Right.
village manager,
Right.
who came to us to ask that because they're doing some construction on the blacktop area, It will cause them to have less space. There's a question of whether it's temporary or permanent. That was one of the questions. And that actually apparently for years now, a lot of the school kids walk right across the street and use the park. The park's a sitting park. It's for the most of us who've seen it, but for those that haven't. And there's a small playground there. There's a walking area. It's very conducive to people who are handicapped. And so there's a question of fencing off an area and how big it is. And as often happens, if you don't have something in writing, it makes it difficult to really understand what the request is. So therefore, as it happens, interim village manager is going to meet next week with the superintendent of schools, and they will put together something that's more formalized. And by formalized, I mean in writing, so that we're not guessing as to size, scope, timing, and a lot of other questions that were asked. So that's sort of the overview to cover it. And the more detail will come, I think, when we see something in a request in writing. And I think the timing is summertime to do some of this. Does that cover what we?
I'm just
what you
reviewing
guys
your
wanted
recap.
Yeah, pretty much.
Without the
it,
details.
it was part of that. I guess some of the concerns that was brought up, I'm sure will be ironed out by next week. But it was how it's being used during the daytime. Is it going to be just specifically being used by Park School? Is there any kids allowed if all the children less than 3 years old do not go to school? So things of that nature. I think there needs to be more specific. I guess there was a lot of those questions. I got a couple phone calls after that as well. People have stopped me in regards to that. So I think that's something that it was sent out in an email and hopefully be able to be addressed by the school
Right.
superintendent itself. So
I'll just reiterate, not only just a written document, but many residents were asking for an actual sketch of what the fence would actually look like. I just also want to reiterate the restricted use was a major concern.
Big concern.
Was a major concern for many residents, and haven't had a chance to talk to Superintendent Chris Soy, just so the board can be aware that sitting parks, it is a sitting park is very different from a recreational park where you have
Right.
basketball hoops or playpens. So while we're sitting here making the decision, let's also think about the variety of parks that we do have here in the village. That was a major concern that residents and actually our superintendent had raised.
Right.
So it sounds like once we get clarity from
I
what,
think
what
people
the-
wanted
what the-
clarity.
what the school wants, what the school actually wants, when
Right.
they kind of plant their
The
flag and
hours.
say, yeah, exactly.
Everything else came from that.
Yeah.
Well, if you build a fence, fences keep kids in, fences keep others out. What do you do in the summer? Is it all day? Is it some of the days? Yeah, I mean, but I think having a proposal was something everyone agreed on, actually. And we are going to have it in English and Spanish. I did talk to a group, but and then Manny came over to, speak with them as well. So at some point that'll have to be translated because, I think the entire community has to understand what we're talking about.
Sure. So, to summarize where we are today, a couple days ago I spoke with the superintendent, and it was good to get out in front of the issue. I think the meeting was a good idea so nothing is sprung upon them when it's already been formalized from a liability perspective and use perspective and operating hours, etc. So the conversation was started. Now, I think we're going to shrink it down to the superintendent and myself to better define specifically what their ask is, and then I will bring it back to you guys and we'll discuss what's feasible and what is not, and then we will further refine the school's asks and possibly take it back to, or definitely take it back to the community again, as we did with this first blush before we formalize anything with the district. And I know it sounds like a lot of back and forth meetings, but we hope to accomplish that within the next month because they are going to start construction in the fall when they're going to be, or actually, I believe in the summer, but they're going to be looking to obviously displace the outdoor activities by the children in September. So that's what we're looking to help them accommodate, whether it be there or somewhere else. We don't want to just dismiss it out of hand because it's the easy thing to do. We want to try to partner in this effort.
Yeah, I just want to say that the two projects are not related. So their construction, the school is its own taxing entity. They're going forward. So it's not that one project is, they're not interrelated. They are an accommodation that was asked of us, and that's when we get into is it permanent, temporary. But you guys will work through that. But I just, at least for people listening to this, wanted to make sure that people understand one project is not dependent on the other. Actually, they're going forward with what they're doing.
Yeah, so for folks who don't either have kids in Park School or live in the neighborhood that aren't as familiar with how it's used, Park School classes have been using this playground for years. It's just they cross the street with the teacher at Everett Avenue and they play on the playground. So this could be additional use of the park because they won't have as much blacktop use as they currently do, which is why they bothered to come and ask for this and ask for some other things too, but just talking about the playground. But it seemed to me, and what people don't think about if they're not in municipal government or in any of these taxing entities is exactly why use would or would not be restricted. To me, when you have your conversation with Ray, I feel pretty strongly, and I think that particularly if I were somebody who lived in the neighborhood, but as somebody who represents the village, that this is a village park. And I think this is what we understood, and I know we wanted to hear from everybody, including the school and the families in the neighborhood, but it's a village park. It's paid for by village tax dollars. It's maintained by village parks crews, and it should be accessible whether there's school kids there or not. They've always been there. They can be there, and so can the neighbors who want to sit down and let their own kids play there, their own toddlers or whatever. And putting a fence there, I would not be comfortable. And I don't know what you heard reflected back from community members, but my inclination would be the fence is there for safety, because if you've got 24 kids that are playing at a playground, it's very easy for somebody to just wander into the street where there are cars. And so the fence is there for safety, and fences exist in a variety of playgrounds throughout the village. I mean, that's not an unusual thing to see. So it was important to have this conversation because when you change something, people want to know why and what that means. And so I'm glad that we had this community conversation. But putting up a fence at a playground, not a big deal, not out of character with the way a lot of parks are. But if we've got on the table that use of the playground to be restricted only to school children during school hours, is that on the table?
I just want to just for clarity, and the other trustees will correct me. So when we stood there, when you say it's a fence around the playground, but when you stand there, just the way it's set up, it wasn't clear from the school because they weren't clear. Different words were used. The park, so that's not the playground, that's the entire park. Fencing around the park. Then it was fencing in this triangular system because the sidewalk. So that's 40% of the park. We actually looked, all of us, and said it actually would make sense. Okay, so that's why we need an explanation. And as I said, it keeps people out and it keeps people in. And I would say to answer your question, we didn't take a vote, but I have a pretty strong sense that it was about 50-50. That we should do this exclusive for the school during the school hours, and another half of the people. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
you were there.
you're right. So that's
would you say it's about 50-50 of people saying it should
the-
be, and then people said, oh, on Facebook the parents want this. So before we do that, the reason we met there was amazing, because when you stand there, you understand why it's logical not just to do that little. There were people that said move the playground part to the other side, so that everybody could play on the playground, but there would be an area for the kids from the school to play in a fenced-in area. So it took on a different shape and form, which is why I have to say that the one thing everyone, I believe, I'm speaking not out of school, agreed to is that we need something in writing. Like we actually need a drawing that says this is what we have in mind and these are the pros and cons of it. And it was about 50-50 of people saying it should be a fenced area much bigger, I believe, than just around that little playground, but actually farther out. And another, and it got into other conversations, but I thought those were tangential to the discussion that we had.
And again,
So I think we need something as a request in writing about what this entails. And there were conversations about who pays.
and because the district has not produced it in writing as of yet,
Yes, that's
and
all.
the ask was verbal, and it was kind of cast out there to a few different people at different
Right.
times. That's why it went tangential, and that's why we need
Yes.
we needed to rein it in, and that's what we did there, and we're gonna come back and figure this out.
I think there's
Looking
more-
forward to it. I think it'll be very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's more, you know, I'm not sure about 50-50, but it was
You thought it
definitely
was what?
a little bit more than a no to the fence. And I
Okay.
agree with Victoria. I think the fencing part, we've seen that in other parks. It's just how that is being going to be used. Who's going to be using that? So I think that's the concern that a lot of parents had. You know, especially the Hispanic speaking parents that were there behind. You know, that's some of the questions that were concerned. You know, because they did have small children.
Yeah.
And yesterday I was actually in the park early in the afternoon, and it was a full park. You know, it was really full. And I'm talking about kids less than 3 years old. There was some, you know, 6, 7, but it was definitely less than 3. So that's a
So-
concern for a lot of them.
All right.
I just want to reiterate, because of the conversation developed, you know, the ask from the district was like 9 to 6 restricted use, and so when you're looking at restricted use, there were a lot of people saying, okay, well, so now this portion of the park is actually going to be taken from us. So as we start having
Right,
these
which
conversations,
then went into who pays for
yeah,
that.
who pays for it? Is there going to be a lease agreement? Like it was a serious conversation.
So I think once you have it in writing, and I you may be right that there were more no's than yeses, but you know, it was a beautiful day. Lots of people were out there. There was a person, you know, in a wheelchair with family. So it was a really great day to go because you saw the park, full speed in use. It got a little loud at one point between people who have kids in that school who, you know, want them
Like
to
to
be
use the
safe
park,
and
yeah.
all that and all that. So I'm thinking once you have something written, we'll have a real conversation because right now we're sort of, what did we
This is all
hear?
the-
Who
this is
was
all the-
there?
This is all theoretical.
Thank you.
Know,
Really? You
No,
guys
no.
had a meeting with.
Wait a second.
with
Wait.
the
No, I
assistant-
don't
Listen,
think
right
we
now,
need
right
theoretical.
now,
We need
let's
up in
wait
the
till we
air,
get something.
up in
Listen,
the
we
air.
can talk. We can spin around the room
Exactly.
for a while now. Let's get this thing in writing, and then we have something to talk about.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is all. Everybody's talking about their observations. I get it, but the school hasn't given us anything in writing that says this is our ask. And as soon as we have the ask, then I think we can. I mean, obviously, people have opinions about this, on this board. I mean,
so let me just say, one of the things that is part of Osening's character is an incredible amount of, and we saw it today. We have a new gym floor. The last gym floor was beat down. It was really well utilized because it is so well utilized. All of our fields are so well utilized. I spend most of my waking hours that I'm not in this building on a field, and a lot of those are school fields. The municipalities and the schools have an incredible amount of shared use of fields and public parks and school fields. And I go to other communities and there's giant signs that say, don't come onto our school field unless you are sanctioned by the school. It's really, it's so unwelcoming. We have neighboring municipalities that do not let residents from other municipalities play on their playgrounds at all. And that is so not Ossining. And I am so grateful to live in a community that has such an openness and a recognition that these public facilities are for the public. So I hope that, I know that we're all going to come to this conversation with that spirit for however we move forward, whatever their ask is and whatever makes sense to us. I guess I had no idea that was even really being considered, because to me it seems odd. Putting a fence up around the playground area, even that whole quadrant, doesn't seem odd to me. And you know, I guess that's it. We all came to it with our own preconceived ideas. But right now, kids play at that playground all the time. And folks walk through the park all the time, and neighbors use it all the time. And if there is an existing problem with community members using the village park while classes are there, the only problem that I was aware of was concern about having so many children so close to roadway without there being a fence, that this was an opportunity to help protect the kids. So if a teacher turns her back, that a child doesn't wander off. Like, to me, that was really what I thought the ask was. So I am surprised that there is an ask for exclusive use by the school of a village park. I didn't even realize that was on the table. So I'm glad we had this conversation. Good luck on your conversation with Ray. I'm sure we'll come to an agreement that makes sense for everybody.
early
That's
too.
'cause
And
took
we
2
added
days off.
things.
Oh, you added, that's right.
Yeah, we had things.
Yeah.
Want to make a motion to adjourn and to go into executive session for matters of real property as well as for personnel issues.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
I-
Aye. And with that, we say thank you very much for joining us for this evening's fascinating work session. We look forward to seeing you 2 weeks from now. Next week is a fifth Wednesday. Enjoy, those of you who aren't already scheduled for a meeting, which is most of us will be back in this room for other meetings. But so Wednesday, June 7th at the Birdsall Fagan Police Corps facility. And I know one of the things we will have on there is we have a couple of public hearings. One of them is related to the puppy mills legislation. So I know that that is a matter of interest to many in the community. I'm pleased to be able to move that forward. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.